Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to Real Talk, Real Deals, stories and tips from the real world of sales, a podcast where we sit down and talk about how to be successful in the real world of selling. Welcome to episode 10. My name is Chris Tine. I'm filling in today for Andrea Grodnitsky, and my guest today is Tim Sullivan. Tim is a sales guru and candidly, one of my favorite people to talk sales with. I love being out on the road with Tim. He is Vice President of Alliances at Richardson Sales Performance, and he is the author of two books, The Collaborative Sale and The Solution Selling Field Book, which for all of you sales practitioners are must-reads. So go check them out. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I've been making notes about little things that we can discuss today. So let's get into it.
Excellent. I love it. Well, one of the things that you and I have talked a lot about since we started working together many years ago is sales process and what it takes to be truly effective in today's market. And we've talked about this before. I believe there's a tension that exists between a traditional sales process, the kind of steps and activities that salespeople follow when they're pursuing an opportunity, and the reality of how modern buyers actually buy. Sales process is really focused on the seller, and buyers, are buying in different ways. But before we get into where things are going, what did sales processes used to look like? How should we think about a traditional sales process in today's world?
Yeah, sales process sounds like a really dry topic,
Yes.
but I find it fascinating. Maybe that's the inner geek in me, and because we work with so many clients who claim to have a sales process. And then when we really look at what they have done in the past, it's typically just a description of various recommended sales motions to get to a purchase. And they're very internally focused, okay? It's like we gave them a proposal, we did a demonstration, we had a meeting, we fought, it's we. It's very kind of narcissistic in that regard, but in the past, a good sales or traditional sales process not only defined the sales motions, but also looked at it by the buyer journey, all right, by the various steps that a buyer would have to go through or a customer would go through to evaluate and make a purchase decision. And if we can align the right sales motions with where they are in that journey and to assist them to making a some forward progress to a decision, that was a good sales process design. There might be points of inflection during that process definition where we look at how we are aligned, and those were typically put together as stage gates, or what we would call verifiable outcomes, which is some customer behavior that tells us, okay, we're in lockstep and we are making forward progress together. And so that kind of gave the impression that a good sales process design was a very linear thing, that you would move from step A to step Z, whatever it is, and you would progress through these verifiable outcomes, and then everybody was happy at the end. So that's
magically magically at the end of it, the customer said, "Yeah, I'm ready to buy."
Right. Yeah. And by the way, that has a lot of utility. I mean, especially if you're a new salesperson and you join an organization. Well, how do we engage with customers? Well, here's our definition and why we do these steps and to go through it. And so you have some kind of a map for success, and that's very useful. And so it was always helpful for managers too, because they could use that as a standard for coaching. And they could also use that to determine the quality of opportunities and the likelihood of winning, so they could forecast more effectively. And so, it's the problem that we've seen, though, is that traditional kind of linear model of process definition for salespeople and how they engage with customers is not working. And it's not working for a wide variety of different reasons. And we can explore that here.
Yeah, we'll go there in a second. I mean, it feels to me like, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, is like the sales process is really useful for the seller and particularly the sales manager, but for the customer, it's like something that's being done to the customer. It's like I am being marched through this sales process, and so talk a little bit about so what is the customer's expectation? Like, what's changing, in the world of buying today that causes the sales process that you just talked about to be less effective?
Well, there was this thing that happened a few years ago. You may have heard about it, called the internet.
Never heard of it. Sorry, what is that?
Amazing, but You know, by the way, the internet changed selling in extremely profound ways and continues to do so. You know, the technologies that are available to buyers as they are wrestling with the various problems and opportunities that they're trying to pursue. Now they have this wealth of information, in fact, an overabundance of information to help them in their journey toward a decision. And so the result of that is that most buyers today do most of the early stages of evaluation for a purchase decision by themselves. All right. They're no longer engaged with selling organizations to get information. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depends on the particular situation. But many buyers today are doing that themselves. And so sellers are now being invited to participate that when the buyer already has kind of a vision of what they think they need to do, and they need to either enhance it or refine it or validate it, and then they can make a good decision today. So, you know, one of the things that I think are affecting sales process today, Gartner, for example, has said more and more people are getting involved in purchase decisions, and I think the average is somewhere between 6 and 10 between in your typical B2B transaction. Forrester did another analysis and said that number can be as high as a couple dozen people, especially for more strategic kinds of purchases. So there's more stakeholders involved, which makes things a lot more complicated because those stakeholders get involved at different steps of the buyer journey. Some of them early stage, and then they'll drop out, and we'll have different people in the middle stages, and then the folks get back involved, and they come in and out. So it's a sort of a revolving door of different stakeholders that sellers need to contend with. And not only that, it can be a lot more iterative today, because as the buyer organization learns different things by interacting with different potential solution providers or by getting information from the internet, they learn things, and their requirements or their vision may change. So they may end up doing, you know, iterative parts of the evaluation cycle. I mean, we're all familiar with the term analysis paralysis, where customers are bringing in different people, and salespeople find that they're kind of looping in, doing the same steps over and over, and they can't seem to make forward progress. Well, that's because they're trying to get a clearer vision of where they can move forward. So it's more iterative today. It's less linear. There are many more people involved. It's more political, and it requires a different set of skills than the good old days when you could just sort of drive people through a linear process to a decision. It just doesn't work that way.
I have to say, I mean, like, talk about the real world of selling. I joined a seller the other day on a finals presentation to a prospective client, and they had 21 stakeholders join this meeting. And it's like, you know, you add like not only all of these stakeholders, but the fact that now you don't have to like physically put people in a room for a final sales presentation, and suddenly like virtual means you can have everybody and their cousin, you know, come to the finals pitch. But how do you align 21 stakeholders? It was, you know, I was blown away.
It's a real challenge, and traditional sales process definitions do not accommodate this kind of buyer behavior, which is becoming the norm now. I was involved in a early stage opportunity recently where we met with the client, and you know, it was an online virtual meeting, and they had 32 people on the call. Okay. Yeah. And this was very early in the evaluation stage, and you know, the salesperson texted me, "Can you do introductions?" I'm like, "God, we'll be here for an hour." You know, I mean, we only have that much time to even figure it out. We'll sort it all out later. And we ended up getting into the pitch. We got to the part where we talked about next steps, and it was funny. It was like the Brady Bunch. They all looked at each other, you know, and you know,
right. You remember that old show, Hollywood Squares? You know, exactly. And everybody kind of like.
And none of them were willing to be, you know, there was no apparent leader to this. So one of the first issues we had was, well, who is driving this particular initiative? And there's a whole set of steps there to sort that all out that salespeople now have to contend with. And that is the norm, I think, now for an increasing number of purchase decisions and opportunity cycles now.
Yeah. So I think that all resonates so much. So I know you think a lot about this. You write books. You're constantly out talking to clients, enterprise clients, and others. I mean, in your opinion, like, how do you balance flexibility that the seller needs to meet the customer where they are, put the customer at the center of their activities, respond to all of those different stakeholders. But also at the same point, a sales leader and a sales manager needs some degree of discipline in the organization. It can't just be like, run at everything, run hard at every activity. So like, what does a sales process look like that balances flexibility and discipline in one approach?
I mean, this has been a problem for 10 years now. I mean, 10 years ago in Harvard Business Review, there was an article published called Dismantling the Sales Machine, which was talking about how buying organizations want infinite flexibility, and they want salespeople who can provide insights and help them make sense, as you've described, and guide them to an optimal decision. But then you've got managers on the other side who are saying, you know what, I need some kind of discipline in place so we can catalog opportunities for forecasting purposes, and we have some kind of agreed upon standard of quality in how we engage with customers so that we can coach and develop people effectively. And now sellers are stuck in the middle, right? So how do we balance those two things between discipline and infinite flexibility, and how is that reflected in the sales process? I think it starts by first recognizing the world is as it is. And so we need to recognize that selling's more complicated. There are more stakeholders involved. It's also not linear. You may repeat or iterate on certain cycles or steps in the process. I think selling is also a lot more obscure today. We've seen the rise of procurement and purchasing and professional acquirers of solutions, and they think it makes sense for them to shield information and not be transparent because they think that puts them in a better negotiating position. And so it's actually harder now for salespeople to really understand what's going on in the buying organization. And also, selling isn't uniform today. Transactional sales for a point solution may be relatively short, and then you've got strategic sales. It might be something that has greater risk for the customer, and it may take a long time and many more stakeholders. So one sales process definition certainly does not fit all. There needs to be some way of architecting the sales process so that it can be more adaptive to those situations. We think, as you and I have discussed many times, that agility, embracing the concept of being agile sales, agility gives you that flexibility and allows the sales process to scale. So I think, and people wonder what agility means. And for us, and if I can provide a simple definition.
Talk about it. Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think it's it's the ability of salespeople to understand the buyer status accurately, and then determine what motions are necessary to help them make sense and move forward towards a buying decision, or frankly, to qualify out. Okay, one or the other. All right, and it's as simple as that. And most salespeople know how to do that, but they really, if you look at sales process definitions, it's like a checklist of activity that they have to go through, and it's not agile and it's not adaptive to current situations.
Yeah. You talk about qualifying out. I think that's so important. I hope you don't mind. I was talking to some new hire salespeople the other day, and I stole your piece of wisdom about who comes in second in a hand of poker. The person who folds first. Getting out. Understanding when it's time to get out and getting out quickly from a deal that you're not likely to win is the second best outcome after winning it. Not investing, days and weeks and months in something that's, really a pipe dream. So, that was my little piece of Tim Sullivan wisdom that I dropped on them the other day. So I hope you don't mind I stole that.
But it's amazing how many people are stumped. I've used that analogy many times, saying, who wins a hand of poker? Well, it's the one with the best hand is the last person standing if everybody else folds. But then you ask, well, who comes in second? And everyone kind of looks at you, well, nobody, I don't know. Right. And the answer is the smart one who looked at the cards, did an evaluation, and said, the likelihood of winning this is not high. So they fold. Well, they've invested the least amount of effort and resources. And salespeople are very reluctant to do that in sales opportunities. Well, this gets to, what do we need to do different in the sales process? And one of them is you need to have some objective criteria that a salesperson and their manager can use to look at where the buyer is and accurately assess their current status. We recommend using a criteria which we call opportunity vitals, which looks at buyer behavior. So many qualification schema are based on things that the seller does, right?
Yeah.
We give them a proposal, et cetera, and so forth. And that can be, that might align with their buyer journey, but it might not. It's much more important to look at things like, do they understand and they articulated what the pain or problem is that we are trying to solve, or the potential missed opportunity we're trying to fill?
And
Right?
do they even admit that there is a pain or a problem to
Right.
solve?
And how
Yeah.
it's amazing. I've seen many coaching conversations between managers and the salespeople where they say, well, what issue are we trying to address? And the answer typically works out to be something along the lines of, well, they haven't bought our product yet. Well, that's not a pain or problem. Okay. It's a problem for us as salespeople. But what are they going to do with it that is going to create some new value that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten? And why did they need it? I mean, that's the issue. And then also, do we understand the power structures there? If there are more stakeholders involved, who are the people with influence and authority? Can we get access to them? And what is their role in that buying decision? Just being able to understand and navigate the organization in a way that we can make forward progress. And then next, do they have a vision of a solution? Do they understand our differentiators and how they can help them to solve their problem? And how do we know that for certain? Is there enough value for them to make a buying decision? Do they understand the business impact of what we're suggesting? And have we agreed on that together? And I think finally, and frankly, the most important, can we help them to achieve consensus? This is where if you get a whole bunch of stakeholders, how can we provide the guidance to them where they mitigate their perception of risk and make it easy for them to as a group, to move forward with a buying decision? And there are various specific actions that salespeople can take to help mitigate those risks and make it easier to buy. So we call those opportunity vitals: pain, power, vision, value, and consensus. And they're based on observable buyer behaviors. What are they doing or not doing? We can even create scales for each of those. And then a seller and a manager can look at it and say, well, have they done X? And let's debate about the quality of how well they've done X. And then we can decide what our next action is going to be that's responsive to that particular opportunity. And that's what an agile sales process begins with, is that having the ability, based on objective criteria, to assess what the true status of that particular opportunity is.
Yeah, I love that. I think the whole metaphor of vitals is so smart, because it's like, doctors use a set of vital signs to diagnose the health of a patient, and these are like the vital signs that sellers and sales managers use to diagnose the health of an opportunity, and say, like, where do we have to lean in and fix something here in order to get this opportunity back on track.
Once we have that in place, then it makes it a lot, frankly, rather than saying, okay, well, I'm at step 3A-2 of my defined sales process, I must do X, like some kind of robot. We can look at the situation. And by the way, 3A-2 might be the right thing to do. It's good to have that definition to give us some kind of guidance. But depending on the particular situation, we might create a sprint or a focused set of work that's designed to move forward with a particular sales objective to make progress on any of these 5 dimensions and the opportunity vitals. And that is a lot more manageable and responsive. It provides the flexibility to customers and buyers that they're looking for, but it also is done in the context of a disciplined process definition that managers need. So you can balance the two effectively.
I love that. So, I mean, because you think about like a linear sales process, like you were talking about before, or even some of the kind of qualification approaches or methodology, if you will, and they're fundamentally, not only are they linear, but like they never go backwards, right? I mean, when was the last time you heard of a deal going from, a stage 5 in a sales process back to stage 2 because, 3 stakeholders left, or we no longer, have a business case that matches their needs today. Same with the qualification criteria. It's like, once you check that box, you don't uncheck it.
Right.
And what you're describing here in the vitals, like, it feels like it is built to go up or down, forward or backward, depending on where the customer is. So it's a much more real-time view of where the customer is, rather than like snapshot, of 3 weeks ago, I checked all the boxes, but is that still relevant today? I mean, so talk about that, like how, you have an agile mindset. What do you do
Yeah.
with data when it goes backwards? I was at a 4 on pain before, but now I'm only at a 2. What do I do?
Right. Oh, well, not only that, but as different stakeholders get involved, you can do a reassessment very quickly. Right. Well, I thought that I was at a 4 here in terms of understanding and making sure that the buyer I'm talking to understands the problem that they're trying to address and the potential impact of that. But now we have a new player. And they have a higher rank and they don't have a clear vision. So now I've got to redo that. So what we would do with an agile process is create a sprint of activity that would be designed to help bring that particular stakeholder up to a level of understanding of the issue that they're trying to address, and it's a lot more responsive than saying, well, I talked to a sponsor early in the process, so I'm going to assume that everyone in the organization has an equal understanding of where we are, which is kind of goofy if you think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many salespeople I've talked to who said, well, I'm at step 6 of my 7-step sales process and the customer's not buying. I don't understand. And the answer is, well, they've done that with particular stakeholders all the way up to the point, but they haven't looked at the dynamics of the entire organization because their criteria are based on these rather one-way stage gates or verifiable
Yeah.
outcomes. They get to those, they think they're going to be successful. That is not the case. So I think starting with a good set of buyer-driven behaviors in your assessment criteria is a great start. But then the next thing that we need to do as well is understand that we're going to focus our activity on making progress in each of those dimensions. And by the way, if you can't make forward progress, if you try it 2 or 3 times and you're not moving them to the next level of response that you're looking for, then you have some objective criteria for doing is what we said to qualify out. Right.
Qualify out. Yeah. Save your time and move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Right. Let's do that. By the way, sometimes when you do that, the customer says, no, wait, don't leave. So it can be useful to help knowing when to nudge them a little bit, and show that you are acting in their interest to help them move forward with the decision. And if they're not going to do that, or they're not going to do that with you, then you can leave that and leave that opportunity. And sometimes they want you to come back, and so you can make some forward progress again. But I think that when we look at modern agile sales process, not only do we need to define a standard of how we want to engage with customers. In other words, we're defining the optimal buying experience, okay, which depends. And we may have multiple variants of that depending on selling transactionally or strategically or to different kind of buyer constituencies. But then we can overlay that not just with the stage, but also understanding of the state of the opportunity in terms of these evaluation criteria. How well are we going up and down as we are progressing through these steps of the buyer journey, right?
So I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this for a second because you were talking earlier a second ago about the seller who gets to stage 6 or stage 7 and says, I don't understand why this isn't closing. I'm at the end of the sales process. This should be a win. But I also talk to more and more sales leaders who are saying, like, I don't have enough confidence in our forecast. Like, why, and the traditional way of forecasting, is to take a sort of a weighted average. So, my stage 4 deals convert at 50%, my stage 5 deals convert at 60%. Talk about how, like, this level of data about the buyer state can help you have more confidence in your forecast.
So, by the way, I am not an advocate for discarding the value of traditionally defined sales processes altogether. I think there's still value in looking at the buyer journey, what are the aligned steps in our ideal customer engagement, and what are some recommended actions that we might take in each of those. And because you need some map of what good looks like for you. But we also need to look at, in terms of, for a particular opportunity with a different set of stakeholders, where are we in terms of our state, and therefore have the adaptability to create sprints around certain kinds of bits of activity or sales motions that are going to help us make progress in these various dimensions of the buying criteria. All right. So I think it's an overlay. So to answer your question, you can still derive a forecast by how we have made progress in an ideal sales process definition. My takeaway, given that the number of all the different stakeholders we have, is that you're really at the furthest step of that process of the person who has the highest influence and authority in that purchase decision. So we may be rarely down the line with an operational level purchaser, but if they don't have the authority to buy and that person is back at stage 3, you're really at a stage 3. You're not at a
Yeah.
stage 6, right? You can be
Yeah.
at different stages in sales process, at the same time. So if you overlay that with understanding the state, which was revealed by doing this kind of objective qualification, now we can use that as a filter. All right, we can determine if I'm not at a certain level of qualification here, then I'm not even going to include that because I don't have the confidence that even though I may be far along in the evaluation process with somebody or some buddies inside
Yeah.
that buying organization, maybe it's not high enough at the principal stakeholder level for us to include that in our forecast. So
Yeah.
I look at that as
I think this is I think this is so interesting in this new sort of like sales enablement, not sales enablement is new, but like sales enablement rev ops kind of world, which is looking to crunch real-time data to make some evaluations about where things are. This feels like a really powerful data source for
I
those
agree.
teams to be able to use to visualize for sales leadership and sales management, where an opportunity really sits relative to that sales process. I think that's really cool.
And the future is really exciting. I mean, AI gives us the opportunity now to find patterns and to provide recommendations for next best moves based on this kind of, the data that we are creating with the evaluations of opportunity vitals as we're progressing through an agile process definition. And I think it's going to get easier for sellers to manage the complexity by leveraging and using those kinds of methods and tools to be able to do the right thing at the right time, to provide that kind of guidance to buyers and make them confident that they're buying something that's going to really help them solve their problem, create value for their organization. And then ultimately, how we succeed in this business.
Yeah, very cool. We are almost out of time. I'd love to wrap up and just pick your brain a little bit. Give us some news you can use. How can organizations that have a traditional sales process, they think about sales process and CRM in that kind of traditional linear way, verifiable outcomes. They probably got some rigor around that. What are some best practices you can share about how you evolve from there to a more forward-looking and more agile state, like the one that we've been talking about?
Yeah, there's several specific things that I would recommend. Number one,
Yeah.
if you don't have a sales process definition, if it's basically kind of, tribal knowledge, but there's nothing, get one. Okay. I mean, there's a degree of order out of chaos is better than nothing. So do that. But then I think also audit the process that you have. I mean, is it aligned with an idealized buying experience, all right, with your customer? Do we have alignment between what your sellers are doing and what the customers want to do to be able to feel good about making a purchase decision for the kinds of solutions you're having to offer? It's a very simple question. We don't have to get super detailed on all of the different potential sales motions because then it gets too complicated. No one can manage it effectively. Simpler is actually better. And then the next thing is, how do you assess the quality of an opportunity today? We would recommend using objective buyer behaviors as a way of filtering that. We like our opportunity vitals for the reasons that we've discussed, but if you need to have some kind of criteria for sellers to execute a sales motion, do a quick assessment, and determine where they really are and what they need to do next. Okay. And then, so once that's set, then next, you need to train your managers to know how to manage and coach to an agile sales process, right? There's not a one size fits all. They have to be more adaptable to understand current situations and opportunities, and then help the seller or the sales team determine what the next motion should be. And that's a different kind of coaching conversation than, well, you were at step 2 before, I want you to be at step 3, go do step 3. I mean, I'm oversimplifying there, but it's sort of the brute force method. Not
right.
It needs to be more responsive to recognize we may do step 2 several times, or maybe even go from step 3 to step 2, depending on what stakeholders are in and how we're progressing. And then finally, what kind of systems of record and automated tools can you bring to bear that will catalog and provide visibility between the seller and the management team on where opportunities really are? using these kinds of agile sales process definitions. And that will make it a lot easier then for you to then apply and use some of the more advanced kinds of analytical techniques down the road to help you provide some recommendations for next best step or next best motion. So those are the things that I would recommend. Get a process, audit the one you have, take a look at your current buyer constituencies, how they make a decision, adopt standards for objectively analyzing the opportunity, train your managers to be able to coach in that environment, and then provide automated support where it makes sense to do so. Those are the things
I think that manager piece is so critical, right? It's not just coaching and developing the people, but it's having like a rigorous inspection process for opportunity reviews that that enable managers to really apply the methodology with sellers and get more out of it.
I agree. Yeah. And by the way, the other recommendation I would leave is talk to us, because we've taken a very hard look at how agility fits in with modern buyer behavior, and how salespeople can be trained to be able to adapt to that and achieve a real competitive advantage and win more business. So we'd love to chat with you and share with you some of the things that we've discovered are effective in a modern buying environment.
For sure. This is the stuff we love doing. Tim, thank you so much for geeking out with me today about sales process and how to build agility in your sales team. This has been a ton of fun. I cannot wait to do it again. If you guys would like to connect with Tim, reach out to him directly through Richardson. You can find him on LinkedIn using the name that his mother used when he was in trouble, Timothy Sullivan, on LinkedIn, and connect with him on LinkedIn. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. Hope you had as much fun as we did. For more tips and sales best practices, please check out Richardson Sales Performance on LinkedIn. Connect with us there. And until then, have fun out there selling. Look forward to talking to you again soon.